has been called the most prominent intellectual of his generation. Toni Morrison considers him the next James Baldwin. He wrote about race, society, and politics, but he's also known for his work on Marvel Comics books, Black Panther, and Captain America. In 2015, at 40 years old, he won the National Book Award for Between the World and Me, a letter to his teenage son about what it is to be a black man in America. His latest book, We Were 8 Years in Power, is a reflection on race under Barack Obama's presidency. And it had just been released in French. Ta-Nehisi Coates, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Your book, called We Were 8 Years in Power, starts with a quote of the sociologist and African-American thinker Du Bois, saying that a good Negro government is a white supremacist nightmare, even more so than a bad Negro government. Could you explain to us that?
In America, there is a notion, I think, that most people want black people to succeed, that there's goodwill, and that we just have these sort of moments that we trip over that don't allow for black people to succeed. But Du Bois's notion in that particular paragraph was, in fact, black failure is, in fact, what the system is designed to produce, and in fact verifies the notions of white supremacy, that black success, good Negro government, as he identified it in there, black people succeeding at governing, was in fact a problem because it questioned the very precepts of white supremacy itself. And he was making that observation during the 19th century in the era, well, he was making it in the 20th century, but observing it about the 19th century, the era of Reconstruction. But I would argue it's a problem even today.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer.
So although you have criticized him, you strongly believe that Barack Obama was a good president.
Yes, and I'm sort of hesitating because I say that within the parameters of what a president could be. It's different than saying I believe he was a moral exemplar for oppressed people around the world. The presidency of America is necessarily bounded by what America has been historically, what the people of America would want. We have a country that, for instance, would elect Donald Trump. And I think that illustrates the boundaries of what's possible. Within the context of a presidency, an American president, I think he was good.
Some leading African-American scholars disagree. Cornel West, for example.
Yes.
What's your answer to them?
Well, my answer is, a number of us supported Barack Obama in 2008. And then when he became president, we were shocked to see him do what presidents tend to do, and that is, pursue wars in foreign countries by means that we don't believe to be humane, attempt to, uphold, a system of market capitalism that we don't believe to be humane, have an attitude towards black people that we believe is, in fact, in disturbing ways consistent with what, we've experienced in the past. But the question you have to ask is, what do we expect within the boundaries of a president of the United States? I could never be president. Cornel West could never be president. Now, that doesn't mean you can't critique afterwards. I want to be very, very clear about that. It doesn't mean you can't have criticisms. But I think we shouldn't act like Barack Obama was acting outside of the boundaries of what an American president could be.
In the book, you say that maybe one of Obama's biggest mistakes could be, to quote you, to embrace the white innocence.
I think two things were working at the same time. I don't think you can actually really believe what I believe and be president of the United States. And so I think actually it was, in fact, that belief in the innocence that made him president. But I think also once you become president, that encumbers your ability to see the country as it is. So it's a paradox. It's the reason why the book is called An American Tragedy. The very things that I would argue that made it possible for a Barack Obama to exist. And I think in the main that was a good thing. Are the very things that I think didn't allow him to see the possibility for Donald Trump.
But then you think that Barack Obama did his best to tackle the racial issues in America?
I think he had a certain rhetoric towards black people that did not have to be there. I think there were certain policies, particularly around housing, where he could have been better. I probably would not say did his best. Again, like I view him within the context of what was possible. The choices that we had in 2008 were John McCain, and before John McCain, it was Hillary Clinton. I think Barack Obama was a lot better than both of those.
So let's talk about Trump. You have described him in the book as the first white president.
Yes.
Could you explain what you meant by that?
Sure, he was the first president who the possibility of him being president was made possible by having a black president before him. So the whiteness, as I've explained or tried to, elucidate in my work, is not a fact of ancestry. It's not a fact of biology. It's a fact of power. And in America, in order to have white people, you necessarily have to have a group of black people who are demarcated as below them. White people define themselves by the fact of white people being below them.
You say that he's a white supremacist. Do you really believe that?
Yes.
Really?
Very much so. I mean, if you define white supremacy as a deep belief that white people should occupy a higher position, should be the hegemons of the country, should occupy a higher position in the hierarchy of America, yeah, I think he believes that. I think there's plenty of evidence to demonstrate that too. I don't even think I'm going out on a limb. I would say people who dispute that would be going out on a limb.
You say the first black president had to be twice as good
Yes.
as anyone else.
Yes.
While the first white president could be the worst among all and
Right.
still be elected.
Right.
How do you explain that?
I explain that by the fact that America is built on what we are going on, in this country since the colonial times of America, almost 400 years of white supremacy, and advantages thus accrue to certain people. And Donald Trump, when he ran for president, had the entire wind at his back. What you have to do in order to understand how white supremacy plays out in America is try to imagine a black man who was repeatedly accused of sexual assault and sexual harassment becoming president of the United States. You can't. You can't. It's not possible.
In this version of your book, the French one, there is an article called Comme un Français, like a French person. Could you explain why?
I think because I thought it has special relevance, to the Francophone world. It's not just about my struggle with apprehending French, but it's also about like culture and notions of culture and power and how they influence and affect us. And so I thought it might have some relevance here in France.
What for you, French people don't really understand about race relations in America?
I think one of the most difficult things for any group of people to do when they are in power is not simply to understand, say, issues of power, which is to say white supremacy in America, but to perhaps understand how those very same issues reflect upon the power and the practices that they have in their own country. I think that's difficult. I think actually they can pretty much get, if I explain the system in America, but what that says about themselves, I think, or perhaps, for instance, their relationship with the Algerians, the Arabs in this country, or their relationship with black people in this country, or their relationship with the Roma. I think that is probably difficult.
You wrote a lot about black men, but very little about black women in America. Between the World and Me, for which you won the National Book Award, was a letter to your son. I was wondering, if you had a girl, what would be your main advice to her?
That's tough. I mean, it's tough for me to imagine because Between the World and Me comes out of the lived experience of being the father to a black boy, but it also comes out of the death of a friend who was also a black male. And I sat on that and meditated on that for 15 years before the book was published. So I guess I would have to imagine myself going through the same process, except if I, had a black girl. And so that, I don't know. I don't know, because the advice I gave to my son was not formed out of the abstract. What would you say to a black boy? It was formed out of the very lived experience of having him, and I haven't had the lived experience with a black girl, so it's difficult to say.
I have a question which is a surprise from a young American writer, BRIT, who wrote The Mothers. I met her in Paris at the end of September at the American Book Festival. Let's listen to her.
Hi, I'm Britt, and I'd love to know how some of the writing from Black women on Between the World and Me influenced your thinking about race and gender moving forward.
Well, you know, I got a lot of questions about gender and Black women, you know, and the lack of, you know, inclusion in Between the World and Me. And I appreciated it, you know what I mean? And I understood, you know, I tried to understand, I don't know that I did, but I tried to understand, you know, where it was coming from. Where I ultimately came down, I think, though, is we have to write the books that are within us. Beyond that, I really, really work hard, you know, as much as I can, to really empower Black women writers, you know, wherever I find them, particularly young, you know, young African-American, you know, women writers, because I think the answer is not to look for one writer to be representative of all aspects of the community, certainly not within a book that's about 150, 160 pages. It's for more prominent Black writing.
I have one last question. You have also taken the helm of the new Captain America series, Marvel Comics series. And I have a question from the Pulitzer Prize winner, COLSON Whitehead, that I met recently.
Given your run on Captain America, if Squirrel Girl is going to guest star.
So funny, I had a dinner the other night with the guy who writes Squirrel Girl. But probably not, because the story I'm telling is a little too dark, I think, for that. Tell him I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry, Colson. I apologize for that, but probably not.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Thank you.